After my divorce, life seemed to lose its vibrancy, as if the colors had dulled. My days turned into a repetitive loop of encounters with my own thoughts. I had grown used to being alone. Solitude had quietly settled in as my constant companion, filling up every moment. But deep inside, I knew I craved something more, something that would help me truly feel alive again. "Mom, you have to come," Henry insisted one evening. Standing in my doorway, his face lit up with excitement. "There's a literary event at the bookstore tonight. It's a private gathering for a select group. You've always loved these kinds of things, and it would do you good to get out for a bit." I wanted to turn him down, citing my exhaustion and desire for solitude. But there was something in his eyes that made me hesitate. He had never invited me to anything before. For a 20-year-old, that was highly unusual. Yet, with a smile on his face, I realized I couldn't refuse. "Okay, Henry, I'll come," I said, my voice betraying a trace of uncertainty as I stepped into the store. The atmosphere in the bookstore hit me immediately. It was relaxed, yet buzzing with energy. Everywhere I looked, young people were laughing, chatting, and discussing books with such passion that it felt like I had stepped into another world. I felt out of place, like I had made a mistake by being there. Sensing my discomfort, Henry quickly approached. "Mom, are you all right?" He leaned in to speak over the noise. "Let me introduce you to Logan. He's a good friend of mine. We work together." I nodded, trying to hide my confusion. At that moment, I had no idea that meeting Logan would change everything. He was taller than me, with dark, thick hair and intense eyes that seemed to be searching for something deep within me. Logan extended his hand, and his smile was both welcoming and slightly daring. "Elizabeth, it's a pleasure," he said, his voice warm and melodious, instantly soothing my nerves. "Nice to meet you, Logan," I replied, shaking his hand. His touch lingered longer than expected. Our conversation flowed surprisingly easily as we talked about books, travel, and art. He listened intently, his eyes gleaming with genuine interest, making me feel like I mattered, and that my thoughts and feelings were valued. He was straightforward and sincere, but there was something in the way he looked at me that was hard to define. "You talk about literature like it's more than just a hobby," he said, his words almost playful, as if books were your way of life. I smiled, taken aback by how accurately he had captured the essence of what I felt. "Books, they've always been more than just words to me," I said. "They're a way for me to understand myself," I added, feeling my heart race a little faster. Logan's gaze was intense, and I realized I appreciated the attention. How long had it been since I felt interesting to someone? As I left the bookstore that night, the cold wind hit my face, and I felt a mix of confusion and excitement. Something inside me stirred, something that had been buried for a long time under the weight of routine and fear. I didn't understand it. Was it the meeting itself? Or was it Logan? But I knew one thing for sure. That night would stay with me for a long time. A few days after our encounter at the bookstore, I couldn't stop thinking about Logan. My life had always been neatly organized, with everything planned out in advance. But now, it felt like fate had come in to shake things up. His gaze, his words, the tone of his voice, they all lingered in my mind, uninvited yet persistent. I felt foolish. A grown woman shouldn't get so flustered over a young man, especially not her son's friend. But despite my attempts to dismiss him, Logan kept resurfacing in my thoughts. One day, I decided to take a walk along the riverbank to clear my head. The cold, crisp air was refreshing, and the sound of the river was soothing. The golden leaves danced in the wind, highlighting my unease. I ducked into a small cafe I often visited to warm up with a cup of tea. The cafe was warm and inviting, with the scent of freshly baked pastries filling the air. It was the perfect escape, if only for a moment. Then I saw him. Logan was sitting at a corner table, completely absorbed in a book, as if the world around him had disappeared. I froze, but he had already noticed me. A smile lit up his face, as if seeing me there brought him joy. "Elizabeth," he called, waving for me to join him. I hesitated for a second, but then, pushing aside my internal resistance, I walked over to his table. "What a coincidence," I said, trying to sound casual, though something inside me was trembling. "I guess we're both looking for a quiet place to think." He grinned and closed the book. How's your day been? Unusual, I answered, barely stopping myself from smiling. I didn't expect to run into a familiar face here. We began talking, and this time our conversation took on a deeper, more personal tone. Logan shared his favorite books, how literature had helped him discover himself, and how he had lost and rediscovered his faith in people. I shared my own stories, laughing at the absurd situations from my youth. For the first time in a long while, I felt at ease, as if I were once again the girl who believed in dreams. When Logan suddenly said he had a surprise for me, I tensed up. He pulled out a small, worn collection of poems from his bag and handed it to me. I found this at a second-hand bookstore, he explained. I thought you might like it. I opened the book and saw a bookmark. On the very page was a poem I had known by heart for years. Logan asked me to read it aloud. At first I was self-conscious, but his persistence won me over. As I read, the familiar words seemed to take on a new life. I could feel my voice tremble slightly with emotion. When I finished, Logan leaned closer. Your words, he whispered, barely audible above the cafe noise. They sound like music. I looked up, meeting his gaze, and in that moment everything around us seemed to fade away. He leaned in, and I felt his hand brush against mine. My heart raced as his lips gently grazed mine. The kiss was so light, almost imperceptible, like the flutter of a butterfly's wings. But inside everything shifted. The moment was brief, yet filled with such tenderness that all my fears and doubts seemed to vanish, if only for a moment. I pulled back quickly, feeling a mix of confusion and embarrassment, but Logan just looked at me with a strange blend of surprise and satisfaction. Logan! I started, unsure of what to say, but he just smiled as if everything that had happened was completely natural. Sorry if that was too much, he said, though there was no regret in his voice. Just felt right. I didn't know how to respond. That kiss had awakened feelings in me that I had long buried. I stood up, saying I needed to leave, and hurried toward the exit, my heart still pounding in my chest. The cold air snapped me back to reality, leaving me both embarrassed and strangely exhilarated. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me the way Logan had, and though I knew I should move on, something inside me whispered that this was just the beginning. Days passed, but the memory of that light, almost imperceptible kiss refused to leave my mind. I tried convincing myself it was nothing more than a coincidence, a fleeting moment of weakness that didn't mean anything. But every morning when I opened my eyes, Logan was the first thing on my mind. His smile, the way his eyes seemed to see right through me. I even tried avoiding places where we might run into each other, but it felt like fate was toying with me. One evening, as I was heading home from work, my phone rang. It was Logan. I wasn't sure whether I should answer, but before I could think it through, I found myself already picking up. Elizabeth, he said, his voice soft and calm. I know you might be avoiding me, and I get it, but I'd really like to invite you to an event on the rooftop of an old building. I think you'll love it. Just give me a chance. I hesitated, torn between the urge to see him again and the fear of what it could mean. But his voice, with its mix of confidence and tenderness, won me over. All right, I said, almost whispering, barely able to believe the words myself. I'll come. By the time I arrived, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of fiery orange and red. The staircase leading to the roof was old and creaked beneath my feet, but something pulled me forward, a mix of curiosity and an inexplicable attraction. When I reached the top, I saw Logan standing by the parapet, gazing out at the city. The wind tousled his hair, and his eyes held a secret, a hidden depth. Thank you for coming, he said, turning to face me. The sincerity in his voice made me smile. We moved to the edge of the roof, where the view of the city at night was simply breathtaking. Logan shared stories from his childhood. How he lost his parents in an accident when he was just a boy. How he grew up in foster homes, learning to survive in a world that didn't show him any mercy. As I listened, I realized I was standing before someone who had endured more in his young life than many of us would in a lifetime. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong here, he said quietly, his voice tinged with sadness. Like I'm just an observer, trying to find my place in a world of strangers. His words hit me harder than I expected, and I felt an overwhelming surge of compassion for him, along with a strange, almost instinctive urge to comfort him. I wanted to speak, but instead, I placed my hand gently on his shoulder. He turned toward me, and in his eyes, I saw the same uncertainty that mirrored my own. We stood so close that I could feel his breath on my skin. My heart began to race, and in that moment he slowly leaned in and kissed me. This kiss was different. It was deeper, more intense. It felt as if it carried years of unspoken emotions, of desires that had been kept hidden for far too long. His hand slid over my shoulders, drawing me closer, and all my fears, doubts, and logic melted away. In that moment, nothing else mattered. He was tender, yet insistent, and I responded, lost in the warmth and madness of it all. It felt as though the world had stopped turning. There was just the two of us, the city stretching out beneath us, the air heavy with the coolness of spring. I didn't think about what might happen next. I simply allowed myself to exist in that moment. When the kiss ended, I felt my knees go weak. Logan was looking at me, his eyes filled with tenderness and a quiet sense of victory. "I don't know what to say," I whispered, feeling my cheeks flush with heat. "You don't have to say anything," he replied with a smile. "I just wanted to be close to you." But at that moment, a sudden chill settled in my chest. Reality hit me all at once. I was a mother much older than him and the friend of his best friend. What was I doing? This was madness. I stepped back, creating some space between us. "Logan, this isn't right," I said, trying to stay composed, though everything inside me screamed the opposite. "We shouldn't continue this." He didn't respond immediately. A flicker of disappointment crossed his face, but he didn't try to stop me. Instead, he simply nodded and softly said, "If that's how you feel, I understand." I turned away, trying to hold on to my resolve as I made my way back down the stairs. Inside, I felt torn apart by the conflict raging within me. That kiss had been beautiful, but something deep down told me I had crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. Yet, as I stepped out onto the street, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. I could try to run from it, but some part of me already knew that I wouldn't be able to resist this pull for long. Days passed since that evening on the rooftop, but thoughts of Logan continued to haunt me. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered that kiss, his gaze, his words. It felt as though I was standing at the edge of a cliff, my heart screaming for me to jump, while my mind pleaded with me to stop. I tried to suppress these feelings, but they only grew stronger. I decided I wouldn't meet him again. I had to put an end to it for good. I knew it was the right thing to do. The thoughts of Logan tormented me, but I understood that I couldn't let myself fall for someone younger than my own son. That would be wrong. Unfair to Henry. I couldn't risk my relationship with him for the sake of a fleeting passion. But Logan didn't give up. He kept sending me short, light-hearted messages, asking how I was, sharing his thoughts, talking about the books he was reading. His messages were so simple, so easy to reply to, that I couldn't help but respond. Soon he started showing up in places I frequented during my morning runs, or at the cafe I visited every Saturday. I tried to convince myself that it was just coincidence, but the sense of anxiety building inside me told me otherwise. One evening when I came home, Henry was waiting for me in the kitchen. His face was serious, his eyes glinting with irritation. "Mom, can we talk for a minute?" he asked, not looking up from the coffee cup he was nervously spinning in his hands. "Of course, Henry. What's wrong?" I asked, trying to sound calm, though I already sensed that something unpleasant was coming. "You've been acting strange lately," Henry said, his tone sharp. "You're always disappearing, and you barely talk to me anymore." He shot me a quick, almost accusatory glance. "Is this about Logan?" I froze. My heart skipped a beat. Had he found out? About Logan? I tried to sound as casual as I could. "We've just been talking a bit," I said. "He's your friend, Henry. Why are you so concerned, Mom?" His voice grew firmer, almost stern. "I overheard Logan talking to one of his friends. He's not who he says he is. He's got problems, and I don't want him pulling you into his mess." A cold shiver of fear crept down my spine. Could it be true? I thought back to the strange coincidences, those unexpected encounters. What kind of problems? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though my throat betrayed me with a slight tremor. Henry's response was sharp. "Big ones. He's already asked friends for money more than once, and now that he knows you're well off, I'm afraid he's using you." His words hit me like a lightning bolt. Could Logan really be like that? Could he want something from me other than what he'd shown? But all those moments, the way he spoke to me, his gestures, had they all been lies? Henry, I know you're worried, I said, trying to calm both him and myself, but I don't believe Logan would do something like that. He's always been honest with me. You don't know him the way I do, Mom, Henry said quietly but firmly. Please just be careful. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I didn't want to believe that Logan could be this person, but at the same time, Henry's warning felt too real to ignore. I had to find out for myself. The next day, an anonymous letter arrived. There was no signature, only a warning. Be careful with Logan. He's not who he claims to be. I felt a chill wash over me as I read the words. They seemed to echo Henry's concerns, but I still didn't know who to trust. That evening, I decided to meet Logan and confront him. I couldn't keep living in this state of doubt. I needed to hear the truth from him directly. I sent him a message, asking if he could meet me at the cafe we frequented. His reply was almost immediate. Of course, Elizabeth. I'll be there. When I arrived, Logan was already waiting. He stood up when he saw me, his face lighting up with a smile, but I couldn't return it. I saw warmth and tenderness in his eyes, but all I could feel was doubt. Logan, I started, sitting down across from him. I need to know the truth. You owe me that. His expression changed instantly, becoming serious. What do you mean, Elizabeth? He asked cautiously. About your problems. About your debts. About whether you might be using me for money. I said, trying to sound calm, though inside I was anything but. For a moment he seemed taken aback, but then he collected himself. I do have problems, he admitted quietly. But I've never used you, Elizabeth. Everything I've told you has been the truth. My feelings for you are real. I just wanted to help you feel alive again. I studied him, trying to read his face for signs of dishonesty, but his eyes were open, sincere. Still, something inside me hesitated. I had been caught in a whirlwind with no easy way out. After our conversation at the cafe, I went home feeling more conflicted than ever. Logan swore his feelings were genuine and that he hadn't used me, but I couldn't ignore the hesitation in his voice when I mentioned money, the way his answers faltered. Could I trust him? And if so, what had been real? The connection we shared? The kisses that had stirred something in me? I couldn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned, questioning everything. Thoughts of Henry kept creeping into my mind, as if he could sense something was wrong. By morning, I knew I had to get to the bottom of it. I couldn't keep living in uncertainty, not for myself and not for Henry. Soon, another anonymous letter arrived. This time it included photographs. There was Logan talking to a stranger who handed him an envelope. There he was at an ATM withdrawing money. And there, with a woman in an expensive restaurant. Each photo felt like a dagger to my chest, further confirming the double life Logan was supposedly leading. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Had I been so wrong about him? I decided to confront him once more. I knew where he lived, but I had never been to his home. It felt like a decisive step, but it was one I had to take. I needed to see his life for myself to understand who he really was. As I approached his building, my heart thudded in my chest. I knocked on the door and almost immediately I heard footsteps. When Logan opened the door, his face showed surprise and concern. Elizabeth, he said, his voice trembling. What are you doing here? I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. I need to talk to you, Logan. I need to do it here now, without any lies and without anything left unsaid. I replied, trying to hide the anxiety in my voice. Logan stepped aside, inviting me in. His apartment was modest, even a little shabby. It didn't match the life of luxury portrayed in the photographs from the letter. The air was filled with the scent of coffee and dust, papers and books scattered across the table. Listen, he began, closing the door behind me. I know how this looks, but you have to trust me. I'm not who you think I am. Trust you. I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. Logan, I've seen photographs of you with other people, with women with money. What is all this? Who are these people? Why didn't you tell me about them? His face drained of color, and his eyes froze with confusion. Photographs? He repeated, his voice filled with genuine alarm. Who sent you these? I handed him the envelope with the pictures. He looked at them, then pressed his lips together, his expression unreadable, anger mixed with fear. These people. They're from my past, he said slowly, carefully choosing his words. People I'd rather not be involved with, but sometimes life forces you into situations. I had financial problems and I won't deny it. But I've never used you for money, Elizabeth. These people are my debts. They're a shadow from my past that I can't escape. I studied him, trying to gauge whether he was lying, but his voice sounded too sincere. Still, a voice inside me screamed that something wasn't right. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, desperate for answers. Why didn't you trust me? I didn't want to burden you, he replied, his voice shaking. You're so bright, so pure. I didn't want the darkness of my past to touch you. He paused, clearly struggling. I didn't know how to say it. At that moment, the door to the apartment opened suddenly, and Henry stormed in. He looked agitated, as if he'd run all the way there. What's going on here? His voice was sharp, almost accusatory. Mom, what are you doing here? Henry, were you following me? I blurted out, feeling the tension in the room spike. I wanted to protect you, he almost shouted. I knew you'd meet him again. Mom, he's lying to you, I'm sure of it. I heard them talking about you, about your money. Logan raised his hands in a calming gesture. Wait, Henry. That's not true. You misunderstood. I'm tired of trying to figure out what's true and what's a lie, I said, my voice shaking with frustration and hurt. You said you had feelings for me, that you wanted to be with me. But now I don't know what to believe. Logan stepped toward me, his hand reaching for my shoulder, but I pulled back. Pain flashed across his face. Elizabeth, please don't leave me. Give me a chance to explain, he pleaded, his voice rough with desperation. I can't, I whispered, feeling a sense of finality. I need time to think. I need to figure things out. I turned and walked out of the apartment, calling over my shoulder. Henry, come with me. Logan didn't try to stop me. He just stood there, watching me leave with a look of loss and hopelessness. My heart was breaking, but I knew I couldn't stay in this whirlwind of doubt and mistrust any longer. I had to put an end to it. But the question lingered in my mind. Where did I go from here?